Goblins are one of the most common types of creatures in fantasy, right up there with elves, dwarves, giants, witches, and fairies. They have featured prominently in Dungeons & Dragons since its inception, and they're often one of the very first types of enemies that low-level characters face. As with many other creatures in the D&D world, goblins are directly inspired by the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, though they are a separate race from orcs. In fact, goblins in D&D are part of a group called goblinoids, which is a subtype of humanoid that includes goblins, hobgoblins, bugbears, and a few other rare miscellaneous ones. They are wicked things who usually are up to no good. They're ugly, spiteful, and they're often found in large numbers. Tolkien himself drew inspiration from mythology and from fairy tales, which, by the way, if you're not aware, used to be a much darker genre. Nowadays, people associate the term fairy tale with a Disney-type, innocent and whimsical style that's wholesome for the whole family and always has a happy ending. Well, until fairly recent times, that was not exactly the case. If you read the original stories, such as those adapted by the brothers Grimm, you'll quickly discover that fairy tales are far more complex and strange and brutal than the G-rated movies of the modern day. In fact, if you only look back at some of the earlier Disney films, you can catch a bit of the fairy tale's original tones. If you look at Sleeping Beauty and Pinocchio and Fantasia, you can find good examples of this. The origin of the goblin is a complex one to research, and the creature itself has been expressed in various ways over the years. It evolved throughout Europe during the Middle Ages, but as I touched upon in my kobolds video, many of the goblin-like monster variants seem to have a common root in ancient Greece with the kobolus, a small, mischievous type of creature that dwells underground. D&D preserves the main characteristics of the goblins found throughout world cultures. They're small, ugly humanoids, roguish in nature, they reproduce quickly, and they live in dark, dismal places, kind of like rats or cockroaches. Archetypally, the goblin makes me think of the nasty side of human nature. We all have a part of ourselves that is like a goblin. It's that part of our psyche that's full of resentments and cynicism and the capacity to do wrong out of greed or spite or just boredom. It's not the greater, better part of us, but rather the weaker, smaller, uglier part. We'd really be better off if we just killed it and let something healthier grow in its place. But our goblins revel in their low cunning and foul pranks, like a canker sore that you can't stop tonguing, or complaints that you can't stop nagging others about. Misery loves company, and goblins breed aplenty. Will you let them multiply until they grow into something truly horrid, a demon or a devil? Or will you wipe out this infestation, reclaim the stolen treasure, and open a space for some less corrupt trickster to move in? Goblins are widespread in modern fantasy, and I'm often torn in regard to their aesthetics. In D&D, my favorite goblin artwork ever comes from 3.5 edition, this wonderful piece here by Sam Wood. The piecemeal armor and the rag cloth, the rusty, greasy, dirty look, the messy hair, the splotchy skin that looks half pasty, half roasted, the sunken eyes, the flattened nose. It's just the perfect portrayal of what a goblin is. A punk, a vandal, a bandit, and of the most gutter variety possible. 3.5 also produced my favorite Bugbear image, this iconic piece by Wayne Reynolds, setting the aesthetic tone for the biggest of the goblinoids that has lasted to this day. I absolutely love the goblins from Fellowship of the Ring in the Mines of Moria sequence, which really I think is one of the best sequences in all of fantasy media ever. Dirty, pasty, grotesque cave humanoids that swarm through the mine, whooping and hollering. Individually, they are really quite weak, but in large groups, they can be deadly. I also love the goblins from Legend. They capture the goblin spirit of curiosity and playfulness, combined with black-heartedness. Between the three of them, each looks quite different than the others, which variety is a great thing here. And of course, we have the goblins from Labyrinth, which have also a good amount of variations amongst them. and they hit that wonderful mix of whimsical and vicious and even eerie at times. Then on the other side of the aesthetic spectrum are the goblins that I really don't care for. You know, the generic, bald, green-skinned things. Look at these from Pathfinder. Pfft, blech. Why glowing red eyes? They're not supernatural creatures or demons. World of Warcraft is just as bad. Pfft, give me a break. I admit this is partially my own personal preference here, but come on. Why make every goblin a shiny green hairless thing that looks just like all the others? It's so boring. Magic the Gathering has a number of different looks for its goblins. Boring, bald green guy. Cartoony. This one could be from 5th edition, or even WoW. This one I quite like. It's unique, textured, thematic. This one's awesome. She's putting a wig of live spiders onto her ally. So let's take a look at the Goblinoid entries that we have thus far in 5th edition D&D. Pulling from the Monster Manual, Volo's Guide to Monsters, and Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, we have some noteworthy creatures here. There are no F nor D tier goblins. Even the simplest and most basic ones still have the benefit of being a full race, complete with lore, personality, flexibility. The Bugbear is the largest and most brutish of goblin kind, standing at a whopping 6 to 8 feet tall, and typically of wiry or strong yet agile physique. Now, even though they are at the bottom of this ranking, bear in mind the basic Bugbear entry is still mid-C tier, whereas goblins are classic neutral evil and hobgoblins are lawful evil. Bugbears are the wilder, chaotic evil. Adventurers often encounter bugbears along with other goblinoids. Perhaps they're bullying around a bunch of little goblin minions, or maybe they're working for the more intelligent and organized hobgoblins. As with many other big dumb brute type monsters, bugbears can be kept under control with plenty of food and drink to gorge themselves, and an outlet to unleash their urges for brawling and mayhem, and of course their cut of the treasure. Historically, a bugbear is a kind of evil spirit or a goblin that creeps around going bump in the night. The word bugbear likely comes from the Old English word bugga, which means a frightening thing. It's also related to Celtic and Germanic words of similar boogeyman or goblin meanings. In medieval England, a bugbear was described as a terrifying bear monster thing that lurked in the woods and was featured in scary stories. Colloquially, in modern English, the word bugbear means a nagging obsession, a bugbear of your mind. It's usually a fear or a loathing that gnaws at you, even a mania. It's something that really bugs you. So the D&D bugbear is pretty firmly rooted in mythology and actually hasn't strayed too far from its original form. Despite bugbears having a strong build and being at the biggest end of medium size, they're fairly stealthy creatures, with expertise in the stealth skill and a surprise ambush that works somewhat like sneak attack during the first round of combat. In fact, the first official death of a player character in 4th edition D&D was to a bugbear, who surprise attacked the poor fool. Speaking of 4th edition, the bugbear is also another creature that received a number of interesting variant entries in that previous edition, but 5e has given us only the basic warrior and the chief. Sorry, Bugbear Strangler. But as a humanoid race, the bugbear is flexible enough for a DM to make NPCs, probably a rogue or a fighter, or even a bugbear war cleric of Hrugek, the bugbear god of combat and violence, who traditionally wields a morning star, which to this day is also the typical melee weapon for bugbears. Hrugek's home is a cavern with multitudinous tunnels and chambers. The central cave features impaled, severed heads of various races, which eternally wail in praise of the savage god or beg him for mercy. As I mentioned, the best and most iconic bugbear art comes from 3.5 D&D, courtesy of the master Wayne Reynolds. This piece used the general look of the 2nd edition art and took it to a whole new level, just setting the tone for all bugbear art that followed. I love the asymmetrical ears, that they have different sizes, and the 2 hands that are nailed onto the shield. Compared to this masterwork, most other bugbears often look too plain, too simple, too neat and clean. This art also makes me think of Pegleg Pete, the classic villain of Mickey Mouse. I just always saw a similarity. Maybe I watched some old Mickey and Pete cartoon as a kid that kind of freaked me out, and then the bugbear art had similar elements. It might have been one of those Halloween haunted house episodes. Interestingly, I did a quick search about Pete, and his original form was that of a humanoid bear, but later he got changed to a humanoid cat. The bugbear is the largest and probably scariest of all the goblinoids, and overall it's a great monster, but he has some limitations that keep him in the middle ground position. Just one chewed up ear tip ahead is the Goblin. The Goblin, one of the all-time most featured and recognized of creatures in all of fantasy. Fighting against goblins as your first level adventure is like the most staple low-level trope in D&D, just right behind fighting kobolds. In a way, goblins and kobolds are essentially the same monster, but D&D has distinguished them over time, particularly taking the kobolds in a different, more draconic direction. Looking at the 5th edition stat block of the Goblin, it's a simple but somewhat versatile mook. They're agile skirmishers with expertise in stealth, extremely low hit points by the way. They jitter about firing short bows or slashing with scimitars up close. As a bonus action, they can disengage or hide, which perfectly captures how they are nimble and sneaky buggers, yet cravens who are used to scampering away from direct combat and fair fights. Goblins are such a major figure, I feel kind of silly even describing them. They're runt-sized, urine-reeking, immoral, cowardly, maniacal rogues that prefer to live in dirty warrens, and they keep company with rats and wolves. Like what we saw with the kobolds, people have a certain affection for goblins, despite their nastiness. I suspect this is partially because we can sympathize with them. We humans all have a side of us that is a bitter, cruel, hateful, lazy, ugly thing, and if we feed it, it will multiply quickly. We all also remember being bullied as children by older and bigger people, which hurt or ostracized or confused us, and it simultaneously planted seeds of resentment and revenge in our hearts. Goblins are weak and flawed, just as humans are. Yet, humans are also strong and beautiful, intelligent, just, and we're full of so much potential. We represent a duality, or perhaps a paradox, while goblins only get the downside, the dark side. No wonder they exist as bandits and raiders. They're vandals who exact their malevolence upon the common folk, and they always retreat back to their own little shadowy, mucky dens away from the bright lights of civilization. There's also the prankster side of goblins that appeals to us, as we are forever enthralled and seduced by the archetype of the trickster. Of course, we love the trickster only so long as he is tricking others, only insofar as his pranks and thieving only swindle those that we don't care about. Are goblins doomed to wickedness by their very natures? Can any of them become good? Should they be eradicated like an infestation of cockroaches? Or do they have potential for something greater? They don't deserve the fate of genocide. These philosophical questions are up for debate. I personally think that goblins can never be wiped out, no more than you can wipe out a fundamental archetype of existence. They are an expression of all those little underdogs that get spat and shat upon by the loftier souls in the grand hierarchy of all. They fill an eternal niche clinging to the underbelly of the apparatus, dwelling in the cracks in between the grimy gears of the clockwork of the universe. The most advanced and civilized of the goblinoids are the hobgoblins. They are of human-level intelligence, with a penchant for smithing, construction, strategy, and organization. Whereas goblins are weak and skittish, and bugbears are lurkers and brutes, the hobgoblins form militaristic legions bent on conquest. Imagine goblins are rats, bugbears are bears, and hobgoblins are wolves. In fact, they are known to breed and train wolves to aid them in battle and hunting. This also calls back to The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, in which wolves or wargs are associated with goblins and orcs. A standard Hobgoblin warrior has quite low hit points, but a high AC, and when they gang up on a target in melee, they have an incredible ability called Martial Advantage that allows them to deal 2d6 extra damage whenever they hit, which is quite potent for the low levels of play. They also have longbows for ranged attacks. This all expresses the Hobgoblin quite well. They have superior equipment and tactical training, but still are not very tough. Hobgoblins worship Maglubiet, the chief of the goblin gods, and they believe that death in battle will grant them a place of honor in the afterlife. Maglubiet is also called the Mighty One. He appears as a giant-sized, black-skinned goblin with fiery eyes and a massive battle axe. His domain is war, and his home plane is the infinite battlefield of Acheron. It's hard to really say which of the main three goblinoids is better. Goblin, Bugbear, Hobgoblin. We could probably say that they're all on equal ground. I think the Hobgoblin has a slight bit more potential due to the fact that they are more advanced technologically and socially. They have their plans and their ambitions, which lend so well to making them a major player throughout a whole campaign. Goblins are so classic and even beloved in their own way, but they have a little bit more limitation due to their depraved and cowardly ways. Bugbears are also really cool, but can run up against the big dumb brute limitations we see time and time again. In the end, all these three are moderately flexible, and DMs can do a fair amount of things with them in a campaign. I even have my own Cugs, who miraculously survived the siege of Bladerinder Fortress. Players also make goblin characters every once in a while. Volo's Guide to Monsters has the goblin racial traits, which I think are a little out of whack when it comes to the ability score adjustments. +2 to dexterity is definitely a fit, but +1 to constitution? By the beer belly of Maglubiet, goblins are not known for hardiness, not in the least. I'd say +2 to dexterity and -2 to your choice of strength, wisdom, or charisma. That sounds much more in step to me. There's also the stats for playing a hobgoblin or a bugbear. From here, we are moving into the variant entries of these goblinoids. Amongst bugbears, only might makes right. They assemble themselves into war bands, or loose war bands at least, that are led by the strongest of their warriors. These so-called chiefs are a bit tougher compared to a typical bugbear, with higher hit points and easily double the amount of damage output. A chief also has the fierce heart of Hrugek, which gives it advantage on saving throws against charmed, frightened, paralyzed, poisoned, stunned, and sleep. The chief is also trained in intimidation and survival, which shows us that he can be both a browbeater of the other bugbears, barking orders at them and making them follow his whims, as well as he helps his fellows out when it comes to finding food, water, shelter, when navigating tracts of wilderness. Bugbears have no true sense of loyalty, however, and their dependability only goes as far as their next meal and loot payout. If a situation gets too lethal, a bugbear will abandon its comrades or even switch sides. This is fitting for a race that lacks a stable society. The fabric of civilization rests upon trust and competence and virtue. Life is harsh. Mortal beings are greatly limited, and nature herself can be more brutal than anything. If people lack responsibility and higher aims, they will fester in suffering. I often see this nonsensical shortcoming in the D&D monsters, from goblins to orcs to gnolls and so on throughout many of the evil races. They're always described as being all corrupt, following only whoever is the strongest at the moment. Well, life and the whole of existence is full of non-stop challenges and tragedies. And if a group is constantly fighting and bullying and backstabbing and vying for brute domination, how do they ever survive? Humans have a certain amount of infighting at times, but we also have a lot of cooperation and a sense of morality and dignity. Imagine an army in the midst of a war that is at the same time having a civil war within itself. It's a recipe for certain failure, and in no way the makings of a society that's able to sustain itself. Contrasting the bugbears and their war chiefs is the Hobgoblin Captain. He is a leader of disciplined soldiers and an upholder of laws. Yes, he may be callous, he may even be a ruthless killer, but he also sees the bigger picture of necessary structure and the enduring foundation provided by tradition. A great example of lawful evil is Tywin Lannister from Game of Thrones. He is a grim man in many aspects, and he's capable of incredible amounts of harshness. His orders are merciless, his strategies are brutal, and his empathy is nearly zero. But the amount of order and success he brings, not only to his noble house, but to the entire realm, are undeniable. When he is in the room, there is no question that he is in charge. As terrible as he might be at times, things get much worse after his death, as things plunge further into chaos. I wouldn't prefer Tywin to be my king, but I would take him over the chaotic evil Joffrey any day. The Hobgoblin Captain statistically is a souped-up version of the basic Hobgoblin soldier, though still with pathetically low hit points. He also has the addition of the leadership action, which provides a +1 d4 bonus to attacks and saving throws of allies within 30 feet. It's similar to the Cleric's Bless spell. It's a decent ability, especially if used right before the Hobgoblins clash with their enemies. So, not bad, but I would have liked to have seen something a little more. I mean, these are experts of martial training and war tactics. Where are his special sword strikes or combat maneuvers? As I've said before, I do love 5th edition, but sometimes it's just too plain and simple, and the monsters are often easy mode. At the upper end of C tier is the Goblin Boss. Snicker and cackle, hoot and howl, drive those maggots forward. Tear and slash, rip and smash, loot and pillage, grope and grab. Lash the minions forward with your black whip and goblin venom blade. Oh wait, no, you don't have any of that. You're just a slightly tougher goblin. Well, at least the Goblin Boss does have one fantastic ability, Redirect Attack. Despite the plain mechanical name, this ability represents a defensive maneuver in which the Goblin Boss grabs one of his nearby minions and makes the other guy take the hit. Ha! Now that's a goblin tactic. So I suppose the Goblin Boss wins out just due to style points, but again, something's a bit lacking here. Moving into low B tier, we encounter the Hobgoblin Warlord. Take the Hobgoblin Captain, increase its overall stats, and finally we get to see the fabled and legendary master strokes. The Hobgoblin battle techniques have been perfected. Shield Bash and Parry. Wow, what a letdown. These maneuvers are decent enough, but they're something that the equivalent of like a first level spell in terms of power. A third level fighter has better stuff than this. This is what the Warlord has trained his entire life for? Give me a break. Thanks, Cugs. Go ahead and break another of his fingers.
I likes the cracklings. Yes, makes me ears tingle.
So in terms of style and mechanics, the Warlord is definitely a cut above, but he should have had so much more. The Hobgoblin Devastator is from Volo's Guide to Monsters, and as are the rest of the entries in this ranking. Like what we saw with giants and kobolds, Volo's Guide really stepped up to the plate in terms of offering some interesting variants. It's no shock that hobgoblins are capable of wielding magic, as about every sentient race has this potential. Driven by their goblin hearts, the hobgoblin mages focus primarily on evocation magic. In fact, this order is known as the Academy of Devastation. They spend much less time on theory and lore compared to typical wizards, and instead go straight for results. Shocking, burning, blasting results. These hobgoblin war mages usually wield staple spells like Fireball, Lightning Bolt, and Magic Missile. They supplement the direct damage with a couple utility spells like Fly, Gust of Wind, and Fog Cloud. To add to their destructive prowess, the Hobgoblin Devastators retain the extra damage feature of their fellows, except it applies to damaging spells instead of melee weapons. Furthermore, they have a spectacular feature called Army Arcana, which allows them, every time they cast a spell, to select themselves and any number of allies to be immune to the spell's damage and succeed automatically on any saving throw against it. Incredible. Like any good wizard, the Devastator has low hit points and AC, but its offensive power is just so strong. Imagine a 10d6 fireball against, 4th, 5th, 6th level player characters? Whew. If he can stay protected and survive long enough to pull off a couple successful spells against the adventurers, he will live up to his name and devastate the 9 hells out of the player characters. There are 2 goblinoid entries in low A tier, and it's a close call as to who is actually the most deserving as top goblin in the goblin dogpile. I'll start with the Nilbog, which is quite a unique monster. To understand the Nilbog, we have to refer back to Maglubiet, the mighty one and chief of the goblin gods. Long ago, Maglubiet and all the other rising goblinoid deities rivaled one another for the top position. During this struggle, Maglubiet slew a goblin trickster deity whose name has either been lost or purposefully erased from history. As a god cannot truly 100% die, the essence of the trickster scattered into a weakened state throughout the cosmos. In the present day, this spirit can possess a goblin, turning it into an exaggerated prankster known as a Nilbog. Goblin spelled backwards, as it causes others to do the opposite of what they want. A Nilbog wreaks havoc through a goblin community and is extremely difficult to defeat, as it can turn damage against itself into healing, and if someone does manage to slay it, the spirit will then simply possess another goblin host. The best remedy is to actually appease the Nilbog and let it play out its riotous antics. Due to paranoia over Nilbogism, most goblin bands have appointed a jester. This joke-playing rapscallion is allowed to say and do whatever it wants, and is generally treated with good humor. Goblins believe that by allowing these jesters, they will make the unnamed dead god happy, and he will not visit upon them Nilbog possession. That is one of the most interesting bits of lore I've ever come across, and if only there was something more to it. This creature is bursting ripe full of potential for role-playing scenes and comic mischief and storytelling. Goblins have crude and dark senses of humor, so we can only imagine the things that a goblin jester or an actual Nilbog would say and do. The goblin feast is in full swing when the jester skips in. He has the skull of the Goblin King's dead mother atop his fool's scepter. Traipsing over to the king, he sings,
Clickety-clack, you buried me, but now I'm back. Give dear mother a kiss.
He makes the skull mouth the words and presses it close to the Goblin King's lips. If engaged in combat, a Nilbog has a paltry 7 hit points. Pfft. However, any creature that attempts to damage it must succeed on a charisma saving throw, and on failure, becomes temporarily charmed and spends its action praising the Nilbog. In true style, it can also cast Mage Hand, Tasha's Hideous Laughter, Vicious Mockery, and Confusion. Once per round as a reaction, it can reduce a single instance of damage it takes to 0 and heal 1d6 hit points instead. Aside from these fantastically peculiar abilities, it has the stealth expertise and nimble escape of a goblin, as well as scepter and shortbow weapon attacks. I wish more monsters were as inspired and uniquely fun as this. They don't all need to be comical, of course, just compelling. The Nilbog is in a special category of creatures that immediately upon reading their entries make me want to run an adventure featuring them. Far more serious in tone, but possibly even more intriguing, is the Hobgoblin Iron Shadow. This clandestine order of shadow monks serve as spies, scouts, and assassins, and they operate both within the Hobgoblin's own clan and externally. In their home ground, the Iron Shadows keep a sharp lookout for any signs of treachery or rebellion in the ranks. As such, they are a type of secret police amongst the Hobgoblins. When they make direct attacks, they don devil masks that not only serve to instill fear in their foes, but also represent how Maglubiet once bested an archdevil and stole the powers of shadow magic to bestow upon these favored agents. The spells learned by the Iron Shadows are typically illusions such as Disguise Self, Silent Image, and Minor Illusion, complemented by Charm Person, Expeditious Retreat, Prestidigitation, and True Strike. In this sense, it's something like a multi-class of 2 levels Wizard and 3 levels Shadow Monk. It can make multiple unarmed strikes or shuriken throws, teleport through dim light or darkness, and it has unarmored defense and a somewhat faster speed of 40 feet. Acceptance into the Order of the Iron Shadows is no easy task. The entrance trial is a matter of life and death, and those who fail are slain if they don't perish from the trial itself. Those who are accepted then go through years of rigorous training and study in order to become one of these rare and elite types of hobgoblins. I think this is a perfect fit for the hobgoblin race, being that they are lawful evil. Monks are traditionally lawfully aligned as a class, due to the amount of self-discipline and regimented order and collected meditative patience that a person must have in order to dedicate oneself to developing the body and mind to such elevated states. Wizards as well, I think, lean towards lawful, as they have to spend long years of dedication to their studies, and they have large amounts of serious concentration in order to understand, experiment, and execute arcane theory. Here we have all the goblin entries from the main 3 bestiaries of 5th edition, that we have so far at least. Am I satisfied or disappointed? I'd say I'm relatively satisfied. It would have been nice to get more variants in Volo's Guide or Mordenkainen's Tome, especially some variant goblins and bugbears. I did check the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, but it only has a single entry, Goblin Gang Member, which really is just the regular goblin, but it's equipped with a dagger and a light crossbow instead of a scimitar, shield, and short bow. So that was disappointing to see how D&D didn't tap into the immense wealth of fantastic goblins from Magic the Gathering. To sum things up, Goblins, I'm glad to have you around. Now get your asses in gear, you pathetic maggots! You there, get the rat cages ready. We've got first level adventurers arriving anytime now. And you, what are you doing to that chicken? Don't make me call the Iron Shadows. I want to give a rowdy goblin cheer to all my patrons, in particular, Warser, Adam Wood, Dennis Cropper, Vince the Fallen Demon, and Nick the Pirate King. If you would like to support this channel and get access to cool things, check out my Patreon page. I make dungeon maps, you can download them, use them online, print them. I make monsters with art, lore, and stats. I get the concepts from my patrons. I also release a free version of the monthly map in the newsletter, so if you can't become a patron at the moment, still take advantage of the open content. Links for everything are down below. This is Esper. Keep those dice rolling, and may your adventures be many.